Slam! The wine glass exploded against Susan's pristine hardwood floor, red liquid spreading like blood across the polished surface. The sound cut through the pleasant dinner chatter like a gunshot, freezing everyone in place. I watched the color drain from Linda's face as her eyes locked onto mine, wide, horrified, disbelieving. You're still alive?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sudden silence. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic that had filled Susan's elegant dining room suddenly felt suffocating. My son Michael's hand tightened on his wife's shoulder, confusion written across his face. "Mom," Susan said, looking between us, "what are you talking about? This is Patricia, Michael's mother." But Linda couldn't look away from me. She stumbled backward, her chair scraping against the floor. Her lips trembled, her hands shook, and in that moment I saw it, the recognition, the guilt, the fear, the same fear I'd felt 40 years ago when cold lake water closed over my head and everything went dark. If you've ever looked into the eyes of someone who tried to erase you from existence, you'll understand what I felt in that moment. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was something colder, something patient. Something that had been waiting 4 decades for this exact moment. My name is Patricia Williams, and I'm about to tell you a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice, family, and revenge. This isn't just my story. It's for every person who's been thrown away, discarded, left for dead by the people who were supposed to protect them. It's for everyone who's ever wondered if the universe keeps score. I was 10 years old when I became an orphan, 18 when Linda Smith pushed me off a boat, watched me sink beneath the surface, and sailed away. They reported me drowned. They collected the insurance money. They moved on with their lives while I clawed my way back from death itself. But here's what Linda didn't know as she stood there in her daughter's dining room, trembling like she'd seen a ghost. I hadn't just survived. I'd thrived. I'd built an empire. I'd become powerful. And most importantly, I'd learned patience. Because revenge isn't about anger. It's about strategy. It's about watching your enemies build their comfortable lives on foundations of lies. And then, when they least expect it, pulling every single brick out from under them. Susan looked at me with those innocent eyes, having no idea that her mother had tried to murder the woman who was now her mother-in-law. Michael squeezed my hand, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. "Everything okay, Mom?" he asked softly. I smiled, calm, controlled. "Everything's perfect, sweetheart." If Linda only knew what was coming, if she had any idea that the scared, broken 18-year-old girl she'd left to drown had spent 40 years preparing for this moment. If she understood that every smile, every family dinner, every kind gesture from this point forward was part of a plan so carefully constructed that she wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. But before I tell you how I made them pay for leaving me for dead, hit that subscribe button. Because this story, it's going to be a masterclass in patient, calculated justice. And trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment. Linda's face had gone from shocked white to a sickly gray. She grabbed the edge of the dining table, her knuckles bone white, as if the room itself was tilting beneath her feet. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, no words coming out, just these pathetic little choking sounds that would have been funny if they weren't so satisfying. "Mom!" Susan jumped up, rushing to her mother's side. "What's wrong? Do you need water? Should I call 911? Michael stood too, his medical training kicking in. "Linda, are you having chest pain, numbness in your arm?" But Linda couldn't tear her gaze away from me. I watched her pupils dilate, watched the pulse hammering in her throat. Recognition and terror. They're a potent combination, let me tell you. She was seeing a ghost. And ghosts don't just haunt, they accuse. I don't, Linda stammered, finally finding fragments of her voice. "Patricia Johnson, you were, the lake, we looked for you." "Linda, what are you talking about?" Susan's voice rose with confusion and something else, a note of fear creeping in at the edges. She looked at me, really looked at me, searching my face for something familiar. But how could she recognize me? I was 10 years older than her, practically invisible in their house all those years ago. Just the help, just the charity case, just the black girl who didn't matter enough to remember. I sat perfectly still, my wine glass steady in my hand, while Linda's had shattered at her feet. Control. That's what separates survivors from victims. I'd learned that lesson the hard way in cold water, choking on lake scum, my lungs screaming for air that wouldn't come. "I think there's been some confusion," I said softly, my voice measured and calm. Inside, though? Inside, something ancient and hungry was waking up. 40 years of careful control, of building a life from nothing, of burying the past so deep I sometimes forgot it myself. But memory, real memory, it lives in your bones. Michael touched my shoulder. "Mom, do you know Linda from somewhere?" I smiled at my son, my beautiful, kind son, who had no idea he'd married into the family that tried to erase his mother from existence. "Oh yes," I said, never breaking eye contact with Linda. "We have quite a history." But to understand why those words hit like a thunderclap, why Linda looked like she'd seen death itself sitting at her daughter's table, I need to take you back to where it all began. Back to the hell that forged me. I was born Patricia Johnson in 1967, in a small Georgia town where the red clay stained everything it touched and the summer heat made the air shimmer like water. My father worked at the textile factory. My mother took in sewing. We weren't rich, but we had love. We had each other. We had Sunday dinners that smelled like collard greens and cornbread, and Saturday mornings when Daddy would take me fishing at the creek. Then came the car accident. A drunk driver, a slick road, and just like that, I was 10 years old and completely alone. The state doesn't care much about black orphans in small southern towns. They placed me quickly, efficiently, with the first family that would take me. The Smiths seemed perfect on paper. John Smith, a respectable accountant. Linda, his devoted wife. Their 12-year-old daughter, Susan, white, affluent, church-going. From the outside, it looked like salvation. From the inside, it was a different kind of death. Linda's smile disappeared the moment the social worker's car pulled away. "Let's get something straight," she said, her voice sharp as glass. "You're lucky we took you in. This isn't your real home. You're here because we're good Christians. But don't you dare think you're one of us." The slap started that first week, a dish not washed properly. Crack. Her palm across my face. A B+ on a spelling test instead of an A. Crack. A toy left on the stairs. Crack. You think you deserve better? You're ghetto trash, girl. Your parents probably died just to get away from you. I learned to move silently through that house, to make myself invisible. But you can't be invisible enough to escape hate. Susan was worse in her own way. At least Linda's cruelty was direct. Susan was 12, then 13, then 14, and she made it her mission to destroy me at school. "That's the foster kid," she'd announce to anyone who'd listen. "Her real parents didn't want her. She smells funny. She probably has lice. Don't sit near her." She stole my few belongings, a necklace my mother had given me, the photos I had left, even my winter coat. When I came home shivering in the November rain, locked out because Susan had forgotten to leave the door open, Linda just laughed. That sound, sharp and cruel, still echoes in my nightmares. The crack of Susan's laughter as I stood there, 11 years old, soaked through, my fingers going numb. And John? He saw everything. I know he did. I'd catch him watching from behind his newspaper, his eyes guilty but his mouth silent. He was a coward, plain and simple. Too afraid of Linda's sharp tongue to protect a child, he'd retreat to his study, close the door, and let Linda's voice rise. "You're nothing. You'll always be nothing. No one wants you." The sensory memories are what stick with you, you know? The sting of Linda's slaps, how your whole face would go hot and then numb. The chemical smell of bleach from scrubbing their floors on my hands and knees until I was 12, 13, 14 years old. The sound of the lock clicking when Susan would shut me in the basement as a joke. The taste of the leftovers I was allowed to eat, always cold, always after everyone else had finished, always standing up at the counter like I wasn't worthy of sitting at their table. I kept my head down. I got perfect grades because it was my only escape route. I tutored myself in the library, stayed after school as long as I could. By the time I was 18, I had something they couldn't take away, a full academic scholarship to Georgia State University. That's when everything changed. Linda saw that acceptance letter, and something in her snapped. It wasn't enough that she'd made my life misery for 8 years. The idea that I might escape, might succeed, might become something, it was intolerable to her. How dare the charity case rise above her station? "You're not going anywhere," she hissed when I showed her the letter, my hands shaking with hope and terror. "After everything we've done for you, you owe us." But I was 18. Legally, I was free. The scholarship covered everything. Tuition, room, board. I could leave. I could finally leave. Linda's face twisted with something ugly when she realized she couldn't stop me legally. "We'll see about that," she said quietly, and I felt ice slide down my spine. 2 weeks later, she announced a family vacation to Lake Lanier. A celebration, she called it. A chance to send me off properly before college started. I should have known better. I should have run. But I was 18, desperate to believe that maybe, just maybe, they decided to let me go in peace. I was so stupid. Lake Lanier stretched out like liquid glass under the August sun, beautiful and deadly calm. The boat rocked gently as John steered us toward the middle of the lake, Susan sunbathing on the deck, Linda sitting rigid with her sunglasses hiding her eyes. I should have felt the danger, should have recognized the setup. But all I felt was hope, stupid, naive hope that this could be a new beginning. "Patricia, come here," Linda called from the stern. "Let's talk." The moment I stood next to her, away from John and Susan, her whole demeanor changed. The fake smile vanished. "You think you're better than us now?" she hissed. "You think that scholarship makes you special? You're nothing. You'll always be the orphan trash we took pity on." "Linda, I just want to go to school," I said quietly, trying not to escalate. "I'm grateful for—" "Grateful?" Her voice rose sharply. "You're not grateful, you're ungrateful. After everything we did for you, the clothes, the food, the roof over your head, and you can't wait to abandon us? I'm 18. I have a right to—" "You have no rights," she screamed. "You're not going anywhere. You think you can just leave? Make us look like failures? Like we weren't good enough for you?" Her hands shot out before I could process what was happening. A hard shove, two-palmed, right in the center of my chest. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a rope. The world tilted. My head cracked against the metal railing, a sound like a branch snapping, echoing inside my skull. Then I was falling, the sky wheeling above me, Linda's face growing smaller. The water hit like concrete, cold. So cold it stopped my breath. I went under, the impact from my head making everything fuzzy, dark at the edges. I tried to kick, to swim, but my limbs wouldn't cooperate. Water filled my nose, my throat. I could see the boat's hull above me, a dark shadow against the sun-filtered water. I waited for them to dive in, for John to cut the engine, for someone to throw a life preserver. The engine roared louder. The shadow moved away. They were leaving. They were actually leaving. My lungs screamed for air. Darkness crept in from the edges of my vision. This is it, I thought. This is how I die. 18 years old, and I'm going to drown because I wanted to go to college. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of Susan's laughter, carrying across the water. I found out later, much later after I'd clawed my way back to life, what happened next. Linda told the police I'd been horsing around on the boat, fell overboard, and they couldn't find me, despite extensive searching. They filed a missing persons report that became a presumed death within 48 hours. And here's the kicker, the detail that still makes my blood boil. There was a life insurance policy on me, $50,000, small but enough. The state had taken it out on all foster children as a protective measure, with the foster parents as beneficiaries. Linda collected every penny. They held a funeral, closed casket, obviously. Susan cried pretty tears for the cameras, played the grieving sister. John gave a touching eulogy about the troubled girl they'd tried to save. Linda wore black and accepted condolences with appropriate solemnity. They buried an empty coffin with my name on it and moved on with their lives. But I didn't die. I woke up on a muddy shoreline, my body convulsing, vomiting lake water until my throat was raw. Every inch of me hurt. My head throbbed where it had hit the railing. My lungs felt like they'd been scoured with steel wool. I was freezing, shaking so hard my teeth chattered loud enough to hear. An old black fisherman named Moses found me. He wrapped me in an emergency blanket, gave me water, didn't ask too many questions when I begged him not to call the police. Sometimes, he said quietly, people need a chance to start over. I'll drive you wherever you need to go. He took me to a hospital in Atlanta where they treated me as a Jane Doe. Concussion, mild hypothermia, bruised ribs. When they asked for my name, I looked at the nurse's badge, Williams, and something clicked. Patricia Williams, a new name for a new life. Because Patricia Johnson was dead. I'd attended my own funeral in my mind, said goodbye to that scared, beaten-down girl. The immediate aftermath was brutal. No ID, no money, no family. I was homeless for 2 months, sleeping in shelters, working cash-only jobs, washing dishes, and cleaning offices at night. I stole food when I had to. I learned which dumpsters behind grocery stores had the best finds. I learned how to stay invisible to police, to social workers, to anyone who might dig too deep into who I was. But I also learned something else. I was a survivor. I worked 3 jobs and put myself through community college night classes, business administration, real estate. I learned about property law, about investing, about building wealth from nothing. I worked as a secretary at a small engineering firm, and that's where I met Robert. Robert Williams was everything Linda and John weren't. Kind, genuinely kind. He saw past my carefully constructed walls, past the fear I carried like armor. He was a black man who'd built his career through sheer brilliance despite every obstacle thrown at him. He understood survival. We married when I was 22. He adopted my chosen name, never pressing me about my past when I said it was too painful to discuss. When Michael was born 3 years later, I held my son and wept, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that I'd built something real, a family, a real family. Robert died when Michael was 10, cancer, aggressive, and cruel. I held his hand until the end, and then I channeled every ounce of grief into building an empire. For Michael, for Robert's memory, for the girl who'd been left to drown. I started flipping houses with Robert's life insurance money and my savings. 1 became 2. 2 became 5. By the time I was 40, I owned 15 rental properties. By 50, I'd built a portfolio worth millions, 20 properties across Atlanta, commercial and residential. I'd learned to navigate white spaces with perfect polish, to make deals that left men twice my age shaking their heads in respect. But the scars? Those festered like infected wounds beneath expensive clothes and perfect makeup. Every birthday, every Mother's Day, every graduation, I think about Lake Lanier, about Linda's hands on my chest, about Susan's laughter, about the family that tried to erase me. Then Michael got engaged to a woman named Susan Smith, and fate handed me an opportunity I'd never dared dream of. The night after that dinner, I sat in my home office surrounded by 40 years of hard-won success and made a choice. Violence? No, I wasn't Linda. But justice? Absolute, methodical, devastating justice? They took my childhood. They took my name. They tried to take my life. Now? I was going to take their everything. 3 days after that explosive dinner, I sat in a discreet coffee shop in Midtown Atlanta, waiting for the woman who would become my most valuable ally. Karen Mitchell walked in exactly on time, a sharp-featured black woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and the kind of posture that said she didn't miss anything. "Mrs. Williams," she said, sliding into the booth across from me, "your assistant said you needed comprehensive background research. Before we begin, I need to know. Is this legal?" "Completely," I assured her. "I'm looking into my daughter-in-law's family history. There are some discrepancies I need to understand." Karen pulled out a tablet. "I specialize in cold cases and historical records. What's the time frame we're looking at?" 40 years, I said quietly. "A drowning that wasn't a drowning, an insurance claim that was fraud, and I need it airtight before I make any moves." She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll need names, dates, and locations." Over the next 2 weeks, Karen worked her magic. The reports came back in thick folders that I read late at night when Michael was asleep. Each page was a revelation, a puzzle piece clicking into place. Linda was a widow. John had died 7 years ago, massive heart attack at 68. The medical records Karen obtained through her channels showed years of stress-related health issues. Guilt has a way of eating at you, doesn't it? Linda now lived in a comfortable 3-bedroom house in Roswell, mortgage nearly paid off, living on John's life insurance and Social Security. But she was hemorrhaging money, medical bills, credit card debt. She depended heavily on Susan for financial support. Susan was even more interesting. On the surface, she had it all. Marketing director at a mid-sized firm, 2 beautiful children with my Michael, the perfect suburban life. But dig deeper. Cracks everywhere. Karen found expense reports that didn't add up. Personal purchases disguised as business expenses. Small-scale embezzlement that she'd apparently learned from her mother's playbook. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But here's what made my heart race. The insurance fraud from 40 years ago was still traceable. Karen found the original police report, the insurance claim documents, even witness statements from other boaters on the lake that day, who remembered seeing a girl go overboard and the Smith family boat speeding away. The statute of limitations on insurance fraud in Georgia? There isn't one if it was never prosecuted. I had them. My neighbor Betty became my moral compass through all of this. She'd watched me build my life from nothing, had been there when Robert died, had celebrated every one of Michael's achievements with me. When I finally told her the truth, all of it, she gripped my hand across her kitchen table. "Girl, make them regret every second," she said fiercely. "But do it smart. Do it clean. Don't let them drag you down to their level." "I won't," I promised. "This isn't about revenge. It's about justice." "Honey, sometimes they're the same thing." The hardest part was maintaining the facade. I showed up to family gatherings with homemade dishes and warm smiles. I bought gifts for my grandchildren, Susan's kids, and praised Susan's parenting. I complimented Linda on her garden when she came to visit. Every word tasted like ash, but I smiled through it all. At Michael and Susan's anniversary dinner, I raised my glass in a toast. "To family," I said, looking directly at Linda, "to the bonds that tie us together, no matter how much time passes." Linda's hand trembled as she lifted her glass. She couldn't meet my eyes. If she only knew that every smile was calculated, every kind gesture was a thread in the web I was weaving. Every family photo we took together was evidence that I was the perfect mother-in-law, beyond reproach, while I systematically dismantled everything they'd built on lies. Karen called me after 3 weeks with the final piece. "Mrs. Williams, I found something else. John Smith had a journal. His executor still has it in storage. I can get access." "Do it," I said immediately. 2 days later, I read John's guilt-ridden confessions in his own handwriting. Every abuse he'd witnessed, every time he'd stayed silent. And the lake. Oh, the lake. I should have stopped her. God forgive me, I should have stopped her. Now I had everything I needed. It was time to start pulling threads. 2 months after that initial dinner, I made my first move. It was surprisingly simple, really. Karen had compiled a detailed report of Susan's expense account irregularities, personal shopping disguised as client gifts, restaurant bills that didn't match any business meetings, mileage claims for trips that never happened. Nothing massive, but enough to establish a pattern, enough to make her employer very, very uncomfortable. I created an anonymous email account using a VPN and public Wi-Fi at a library downtown. Professional, concerned, full of specific details that could only come from someone with access to internal records. To whom it may concern, I am writing to alert you to potential financial irregularities in your marketing department. I hit send on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Susan's world started tilting. Michael came home that evening looking worried. "Susan's having a rough week," he said, kissing me on the cheek as I prepared dinner in his kitchen. "Some issue at work with her expense reports. Probably just a clerical error, but she's stressed." "Oh, no," I said, my voice perfectly calibrated with motherly concern. "Is there anything I can do to help? Just maybe don't mention it if you see her. She's pretty embarrassed." "Of course, sweetheart." If he only knew that his mother had authored his wife's nightmare. The investigation at Susan's company was swift and thorough. Her boss called her in for a meeting with HR. They went through 6 months of expense reports line by line. Susan couldn't explain the discrepancies. She stammered, made excuses, promised to pay back any mistakes. She received an official written warning, not enough to fire her, not yet, but enough to put her on probation, enough to make her panic. I watched the stress lines appear around her eyes at family dinner that Sunday, the way her jaw clenched when someone mentioned work, the forced brightness in her voice when she insisted everything was totally fine. Karen had also set up a discreet tap on Linda's phone, technically legal since Linda had agreed to a security monitoring service offered by a shell company we controlled. The recordings were enlightening. "Susan, what's happening?" Linda's voice shaky and old. "First your job, now this. It's like we're cursed. Mom, stop being dramatic. It's just a misunderstanding." "But the timing. Ever since that dinner, ever since she came into our lives." "Mother, Patricia Williams is Michael's mom. She's been nothing but kind to us." "You don't understand. You don't know what she—" Linda's voice dropped to a whisper. "What if she knows? What if she remembers?" "Remembers what? Mom, you're not making sense." Long pause. Static on the line. Then, "Nothing. Never mind. Just be careful around her, okay? You're being paranoid." The irony was delicious. Linda's instincts were screaming danger, but she couldn't voice the real reason without confessing what they'd done. She was trapped by her own guilt, watching shadows jumping at every coincidence. And this was just the beginning. I saved the recording and filed it carefully with all the other evidence. Then I went downstairs and baked chocolate chip cookies, Michael's favorite, and delivered them to his house the next morning with a cheerful smile. "Just thinking about you two," I told Susan, handing her the warm container. "You've seemed stressed lately. Thought you could use a little sweetness." Susan's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Patricia. That's very thoughtful." As I drove away, I watched her in my rearview mirror, standing on her porch, staring at the cookies like they might be poisoned. Good instincts, Susan. Wrong solution. The game was just beginning. "Susan, we should have lunch," I suggested brightly at Michael's birthday celebration. "Just us girls. I feel like we haven't had a chance to really bond as mother and daughter-in-law." She hesitated for just a moment. I saw it, that flicker of discomfort. But social convention won out. "That would be lovely, Patricia." We met at a trendy bistro in Buckhead the following Tuesday. Susan ordered a salad she barely touched. I ordered wine and actually drank it. "So," I said, stirring my soup, "I've been meaning to tell you, your mom seems so familiar to me. I keep trying to place where I might have met her before." Susan's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Really? Where are you from originally?" "Oh, I moved around a lot," I said vaguely. "Georgia, though, born and raised. Small town near Lake Lanier, actually." Her face went very still. Lake Lanier? Mm-hmm. Beautiful place. Lots of memories there, some good, some... I smiled, letting the sentence hang. Well, water holds secrets, doesn't it? I wouldn't know. She laughed, but it came out strangled. Mom's always been dramatic about that lake. Some old family thing, I think. How interesting. I sipped my wine, watching her squirm. Family history can be such a complicated thing. The conversation shifted after that, but the seed was planted. Susan kept glancing at me with this new wariness, like she was seeing me for the first time and didn't quite like what she saw. As lunch wound down, I struck. You know, Susan, Michael mentioned you've been having some financial stress. The house, the kids' private school, and now this work situation. If you ever need help, I'm here. Family helps family. Pride warred with desperation on her face. Desperation won. Actually, Patricia, that's incredibly generous. We've been having some cash flow issues and... Say no more. I pulled out my checkbook with a flourish. How much do you need? $20,000. That's what I loaned them, with the most generous terms imaginable. Low interest, flexible payment schedule, no pressure. I can't thank you enough, Susan said, clutching the check like a lifeline. Family, I repeated, squeezing her hand. That's what family does. What Susan didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I was simultaneously executing a much larger financial maneuver. Through one of my shell companies, I'd purchased the note on Linda's mortgage from her original lender. It's amazing what you can do with good credit and the right connections. Linda's mortgage was a mess. She'd refinanced 3 times, pulling out equity to support her lifestyle and help Susan. She was barely making payments. The moment my company took over the note, I had her bank statements analyzed. Every late payment, every insufficient fund fee, every cash advance from credit cards to cover the mortgage. I didn't foreclose immediately, that would be too obvious. Instead, I had my company's representatives call Linda with helpful financial advice. Invest in this opportunity, consolidate that debt, refinance again, but at variable rates that would balloon in 6 months. Linda, desperate and not particularly financially savvy, took every piece of bad advice. Then came the foreclosure notice. Official, legal, and utterly devastating. Karen played me the intercepted call that night. Susan, they're going to take the house. The mortgage company sent a notice. I'm 3 months behind and they're starting proceedings. Mom, calm down. How did this happen? I don't know. The payments kept going up, and then the investment they recommended lost half my money, and now, oh God, where am I going to live? Can you talk to them? Negotiate? I've tried. They won't budge. It's like karma, Susan. Like we're being punished. Punished for what? Long, heavy silence. Nothing. I'm just stressed. I'm not thinking straight. I smiled in the darkness of my office, listening to Linda's world crumble. The same terror she'd inflicted on a teenage girl on a boat. Now it was her turn to feel helpless, to feel like everything was slipping away, to drown in consequences. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I picked up the phone and called Susan. Sweetheart, Michael told me about Linda's housing trouble. I might have a solution. David Chen had been my attorney for 15 years. When I called him into my home office for this particular meeting, he arrived with his usual briefcase and his unusually serious expression. Patricia, I've reviewed everything Karen sent me, he said, spreading documents across my mahogany desk. The insurance fraud, the attempted murder, John's journals, the witness statements. This is substantial. Can we prosecute? I asked. In Georgia, there's no statute of limitations on insurance fraud if it was never reported. And attempted murder? Same situation. He leaned back, studying me. But I have to ask, why now? Why after 40 years? Because 40 years ago, I was a scared kid with no resources and no voice, I said quietly. Now I have both, and I have a son to protect from these people. David nodded slowly. Then we build the case carefully, document everything, make it airtight, because when we drop this bomb, we only get one shot. That's exactly what I intend to do." Then came the unexpected gift. Anthony Mitchell, Susan's half-brother from Linda's second marriage. Karen found him first, tracked him down in Savannah where he ran a small bookshop. When she approached him about his mother, his laugh was bitter. "My mother is a monster," he said flatly. "She made my childhood hell, drove my father to an early grave with her constant schemes and lies. If you're investigating her, I'll help however I can." Anthony had kept emails, years of them. In one exchange from 15 years ago, Linda had written to her sister, "I don't regret what happened at the lake. That girl was going to ruin us, make us look like failures. Sometimes you have to do what's necessary." Karen brought me printouts, evidence of consciousness of guilt, proof of intent. "He wants to meet you," Karen said. When Anthony and I sat down in my living room, he looked at me with something like awe. "You're Patricia Johnson," he said. "The foster child. I found the old news articles about your drowning. Mom has nightmares about you. Did you know that? Wakes up screaming sometimes about the girl at the bottom of the lake." "Good," I said coldly. "She should." 3 weeks passed in careful preparation. David assembled a legal team. Karen compiled a complete timeline. Anthony provided insider details about Linda's finances, her secrets, her weaknesses. But tensions were rising in ways I couldn't fully control. At Sunday dinner, Susan snapped at Michael over something trivial, his mother's constant presence in their lives. "Your mom is always here, always helping, always giving advice." Susan's voice rose sharply. "Doesn't she have her own life?" Michael looked stunned. "She's trying to help us with your mom's situation and—" "Exactly, she's too involved. It's like she's taking over everything." I stood in the kitchen, listening through the doorway. If she only knew that taking over was exactly my intention. Every kind gesture was a move on the chessboard. Every loan was a chain. Every piece of advice was positioning them exactly where I needed them. That night, I reviewed my timeline. The charity gala was scheduled for 6 months from the initial dinner. Every piece was falling into place. "Robert," I whispered to his photo on my nightstand, "I'm going to make them pay for every tear, every nightmare, every scar. Not because I want revenge, but because justice delayed is not justice denied." The next morning, I called Linda. "I think we need to talk about your housing situation," I said warmly. "I may have a solution that works for everyone." Michael insisted on hosting Thanksgiving at his house that year, and I arrived early with 3 pies and a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Linda was already there, helping Susan in the kitchen with the kind of forced cheerfulness that barely masked the anxiety rolling off her in waves. "Patricia," Michael hugged me. "Everything smells amazing." "Family traditions," I said, setting the pies on the counter. "My mother, my biological mother, always said that food is how we show love." Linda flinched at the word biological. Susan pretended not to notice. Dinner started peacefully enough. The turkey was perfectly browned, the stuffing fragrant with sage and butter, the whole house smelling like a Norman Rockwell painting. We sat around the table, 3 generations full of secrets. I waited until dessert to strike. "You know," I said casually, cutting into my pecan pie, "I was thinking about family vacations earlier. Michael, remember when I took you to Lake Lanier when you were 12? You loved it there." Susan's fork clattered against her plate. Linda went rigid. "That lake has so much history," I continued, my voice light and conversational. "I used to go there as a teenager, actually. One summer, it would have been 1985, I think, there was this terrible accident. A girl drowned, or at least everyone thought she drowned." "Mom," Michael said, confused by the sudden shift in mood, "are you okay?" "Oh, I'm wonderful, sweetheart." I smiled at Linda, who had gone the color of old paper. "I was just remembering. You know how certain places stick with you? Certain memories that never quite fade?" Linda stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. "I need air," she gasped. "I'm not feeling well." "Mother!" Susan jumped up. "What's wrong? Change the subject," Linda snapped, her voice ragged. "Just change the damn subject." The table fell into uncomfortable silence. Linda stumbled toward the bathroom, one hand pressed against the wall for support. Susan threw me an accusatory look before following her mother. Michael touched my hand. "Mom, what was that about?" "Just old memories, honey," I said softly. "Sometimes the past catches up with people in unexpected ways." But I wasn't done. Oh, I wasn't nearly done. The next week, I made a donation to the Lake Lanier Drowning Prevention Foundation. $25,000, generous and public, made in memory of Patricia Johnson, lost to Lake Lanier in 1985. The foundation sent out their quarterly newsletter to all donors and community members, thanking major contributors. Linda's sister was on their mailing list. She forwarded it to Linda with a confused message. "Didn't you tell me your foster daughter's name was Patricia Johnson? Is this related?" Karen intercepted Linda's panicked phone call to her sister that night. "It's her." Linda's voice was nearly hysterical. "It's her ghost. She's coming for me. She knows." "Linda, calm down. Who knows what?" "Patricia, she's not dead. She's been alive this whole time, and now she's... Oh, God, she's married to Susan's husband. She's Michael's mother. How did I not see it?" "You're not making sense." "The lake. I pushed her into the lake. We left her there. And now she's back and she's going to destroy us." "Linda, did you just confess to—" The call cut off abruptly. Linda had realized what she'd said, but it was too late. I had the recording. David had the recording. We had her confession, panicked and clear, on digital audio that could be authenticated and used in court. I listened to it 3 times that night, sitting in my darkened office. Each time I heard that note of terror in her voice. The same terror I'd felt going under the water, my lungs screaming, my head bleeding, watching the boat sail away. The smell of Thanksgiving pie still lingered in my clothes. I'd sat at that table, broken bread with my son and the family that had tried to erase me, and I'd smiled through every moment. But Linda knew now. She knew I remembered. She knew I was coming. And that fear, that anticipation of consequences, that was almost as sweet as the justice itself. Almost. Linda's health deteriorated rapidly after Thanksgiving. Susan called Michael in tears one December evening, and he put her on speaker while I pretended to read a book in his living room. "She's having panic attacks," Susan said, her voice cracking. "Multiple times a day, she won't sleep. She keeps talking about drowning, about ghosts, about karma catching up. Michael, I think she's having a breakdown." "Has she seen a doctor?" Michael asked, concern evident in his voice. "She refuses. She just locks herself in her room and she keeps saying your mother's name. I don't understand what Patricia has to do with any of this." I carefully turned a page of my book, not looking up. "Maybe it's just stress," Michael suggested. "The foreclosure, the money problems." "It's more than that. She's terrified. Actually terrified." After the call ended, Michael turned to me. "Mom, this is going to sound strange, but did you know Linda before? Susan said her mom keeps mentioning you." I looked up, my expression carefully neutral. "I don't recall ever meeting her before that dinner, sweetheart. But you know how memory works at that age. Sometimes people confuse faces, especially when they're stressed." He accepted this because he trusted me, because I was his mother, and I had never given him reason to doubt me. Meanwhile, Susan's own world was crumbling. The tax audit I'd orchestrated, another anonymous tip, this time about inherited tax evasion schemes from Linda, had turned up years of questionable deductions and unreported income. The IRS was thorough and unforgiving. Susan owed back taxes, significant penalties, interest that compounded daily. Her marriage to Michael was fracturing under the pressure. They fought about money, about Linda, about my excessive involvement in their lives. I heard them arguing one night when I stopped by to drop off groceries. "Your mother lent us $20,000, Susan hissed. "We're drowning in debt to her. She was trying to help." Was she? Or was she buying influence? Control? "Michael, doesn't it bother you that every time we turn around, she's there? She's my mother. What's wrong with wanting to help her family?" "What's wrong is that it doesn't feel like help anymore. It feels like like a trap. Smart girl, Susan. Too bad you figured it out too late. I continued offering support, of course, sympathetic ears, financial advice that led them deeper into debt, suggestions for lawyers who were competent enough to seem helpful but not good enough to actually solve their problems. Betty watched me orchestrate it all with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're playing with people's lives, Patricia," she said one evening over tea. "They played with mine first," I replied quietly. "They threw a teenager off a boat and collected insurance money on her corpse. This isn't cruelty, Betty. This is consequences. Just don't lose yourself in this." But I wasn't lost. I was more found than I'd been in 40 years. The breakthrough came in January. Karen had been working on a critical piece of the puzzle, finding the boat captain who'd been at Lake Lanier that day in 1985. His name was Marcus Green, now 73 and living in Florida. Karen flew down to interview him. "I remember that day," he told her, his statement recorded and notarized. "I saw a young black girl go off that boat, hit her head on the way down. They didn't even slow down. I called it into the marina, but by the time rangers got there, the family was gone. They found the boat empty at the dock later. I always wondered what happened to that girl." "She lived," Karen told him, "and now she's seeking justice." Marcus Green agreed to testify, to provide a witness statement, to confirm that what Linda and John had reported as an accident was actually abandonment at best, attempted murder at worst. I had everything now. The confession, the witness, the insurance documents, John's journal, 40 years of lies, documented and provable. The only question remaining was how to deploy it all for maximum impact. And I knew exactly when and where, at the charity gala I was hosting in 3 months, with every important person in Atlanta society watching. Linda and Susan had no idea that their execution date was already set. I called Michael to my house on a cold February evening. Not Susan, just my son. He arrived looking worried. I'd never been so serious in a text before. "Mom, what's going on? You're scaring me." I poured us both tea and sat across from him at my kitchen table. "Michael, there's something I need to tell you about Linda and Susan, about who they really are, about who I really am." And then I told him everything. The foster care, the abuse, the boat, the 40 years of survival in silence. I showed him documents, recordings, photographs. I watched my son's face transform from confusion to horror to rage. "They tried to kill you?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Susan's mother tried to, and they just left you?" "Yes. And Susan, did Susan know?" "She was on the boat, Michael. She was 14. I don't know what she understood then or what Linda told her after, but she was there." Michael stood, pacing, running his hands through his hair. "This whole time, our whole marriage, I've been—" He couldn't finish the sentence. I reached for his hand. "Son, I need you to understand. This isn't about destroying your marriage for revenge. This is about justice, about making sure they face consequences for what they did, about protecting you and your children from people who are capable of this kind of evil." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to expose them. Legally, publicly, and I need to know. Are you with me?" Michael looked at me, his eyes wet. "You're my mother. You raised me. You taught me right from wrong. If you say they did this—" He swallowed hard. "Then yes, I'm with you." That night, things accelerated. Michael confronted Susan, demanding the truth about that summer at Lake Lanier. Susan denied everything, claimed her mother was delusional, that I was lying. But Michael had seen the evidence. He'd heard the recordings. He knew. The fight was spectacular, loud enough that neighbors called to check on them. Susan screamed that I was manipulating him, that I was a liar, that her mother would never do something like that. "Then why is she having panic attacks about drowning?" Michael shouted back. "Why does she scream about Patricia Johnson in her sleep?" Linda, staying with them because of her housing crisis, came running downstairs. She looked at Michael's face and knew that the truth was out. "You brought that woman back into our lives," Linda shrieked at Susan. I told you she looked familiar. I told you there was something wrong. You said she was dead, Susan screamed back. You said she drowned. You said... She stopped, hand over her mouth, realizing what she'd just admitted. Michael recorded the whole thing on his phone. Their alliance was fracturing, exactly as I'd planned. 6 months had passed since that first dinner. 6 months of careful orchestration, of pulling threads, of watching an empire of lies collapse brick by brick. The charity gala was set for March 15th, the Ides of March. I appreciated the historical irony. The event was a fundraiser for foster care reform and child abuse prevention, held at the Ritz-Carlton in downtown Atlanta. I'd invited 500 people, business leaders, politicians, journalists, and of course Linda and Susan. They tried to decline. Susan called. Her voice strained. Patricia, with everything going on, we don't think we can make it. Oh, but I've already listed you as guests of honor, I said sweetly. You and Linda both. I'm giving a speech about foster care, and I'd love to have you there. For family. The word family hung in the air like a threat. They came because refusing would have looked suspicious, because they still hoped, somehow, that they could manage this situation, that I was bluffing, that their secrets were still safe. Meanwhile, I'd found the final piece of my revenge puzzle, my mother's necklace, the one Linda had stolen when I was 11. Karen tracked it down to a pawn shop in Valdosta where Linda had sold it in 1986. I bought it back for $10,000 and had it appraised. It was worth significantly more, an antique piece my grandmother had given my mother, stolen property, documented, traceable. I had it cleaned and restored, and I planned to wear it to the gala. David had prepared all the legal documents. The police were briefed and ready. District attorneys had reviewed the case and were prepared to file charges the moment I gave the word. Marcus Green had flown in from Florida to attend as my guest. Betty helped me pick out my dress, red, bold, victorious. You look like justice, she said, tears in her eyes. I feel like it too. The week before the gala, Linda had a complete breakdown, hospitalized for severe anxiety and paranoid delusions. Susan brought her home after 2 days, medicated and hollow-eyed. Michael had moved out of his house, staying with me. He was filing for divorce, seeking full custody of the children. The legal papers had been served. Susan was isolated now. Her mother was a wreck. Her husband had left her. Her job was in jeopardy. Her finances were destroyed. The IRS was pursuing her, and she had no idea that the worst was still to come. On March 14th, the night before the gala, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, fastening my mother's necklace around my throat. The gold was warm against my skin. Tomorrow, I told my reflection, tomorrow Patricia Johnson gets her voice back. Tomorrow, everyone would know what Linda and Susan Smith had done. Tomorrow, after 40 years, I would finally be free. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom glittered like a cathedral of wealth and power. 500 people in evening wear, champagne flutes catching the light from crystal chandeliers, the air perfumed with roses and expensive cologne. A live orchestra played soft jazz as guests mingled, admiring the silent auction items and congratulating me on such a successful event. I stood at the edge of the room in my red dress, my mother's necklace warm against my throat, watching Linda and Susan arrive. Linda looked medicated, slow movements, glassy eyes. Susan gripped her mother's arm like a lifeline, scanning the room with barely concealed panic. They'd dressed for the occasion, Linda in navy blue, Susan in black. Funeral colors, I thought. How appropriate. Michael stood beside me, his hand in mine. "Are you ready?" he whispered. "I've been ready for 40 years. At exactly 8 o'clock, I walked to the stage. The orchestra faded. A spotlight found me. 500 faces turned my direction, including several I'd specifically invited. Detective Sarah Morrison from the Atlanta PD, 2 district attorneys, Marcus Green, the boat captain, Anthony seated in the front row, and journalists from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and WSB-TV. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady and clear through the microphone. Thank you all for coming tonight to support foster care reform and child abuse prevention. These causes are deeply personal to me, and I want to tell you why. I saw Susan stiffen in her seat. Linda tried to stand, but Anthony blocked her exit. My name is Patricia Williams, but I was born Patricia Johnson. I paused, letting that sink in. In 1977, when I was 10 years old, my parents died in a car accident. The state of Georgia placed me in foster care with a family who looked perfect on paper, John and Linda Smith, their daughter Susan. Susan's face went white. Linda made a sound like a wounded animal. For 8 years, I endured abuse. Physical, emotional, racial. I was beaten, starved, degraded, told I was lucky they didn't send me back to the ghetto. I survived by becoming invisible, by excelling in school, by dreaming of escape. The ballroom was silent now, except for my voice and the soft whir of cameras. The journalists were recording everything. In 1985, at 18 years old, I received a full scholarship to college, my chance at freedom, but Linda Smith couldn't allow that. I looked directly at her. During a family vacation at Lake Lanier, she pushed me off a boat. I hit my head on the railing. I went into the water unconscious, and they left me there to drown. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Linda stood screaming, "Lies! Those are lies! She's crazy!" Am I? I gestured to the screens behind me, where David began projecting documents. Here's the police report from August 15, 1985, reporting my drowning. Here's the insurance claim for $50,000 that Linda Smith filed and collected on my life. Here's her confession, recorded 6 weeks ago. I pushed her into the lake. We left her there. Linda's voice played through the speakers, tinny and terrified but unmistakable. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Susan burst into tears, trying to flee toward the exit, but found her path blocked by hotel security I'd arranged. "I didn't know," she sobbed. "I was just a kid." "You were 14, I said coldly, "old enough to tell someone, old enough to call for help, old enough to object when your mother collected money on a girl she murdered. But you did nothing." Marcus Green stood from his seat. "I witnessed the incident that day," he announced in his gravelly voice. "I saw her go into that water. I saw that boat speed away. I called it in. I've carried that guilt for 40 years, and I'm here to make it right." Detective Morrison and her colleagues moved through the crowd toward Linda and Susan. Miranda rights were read, the words I dreamed of hearing for 4 decades. Linda collapsed, screaming incoherently about ghosts and karma. Susan just stood there, tears streaming down her face, her entire world crumbling in real time on social media and live television. I descended from the stage and walked directly to Linda. She looked up at me from the floor, and I saw it. True, complete recognition of what she'd done and what it had cost her. "You left me for dead," I said quietly, just for her. "You collected money on my corpse. You moved on with your life while I clawed my way back from nothing. But here's what you didn't understand, Linda. Survivors don't just survive. We thrive. And now you face the living." The police took them both away in handcuffs, flashbulbs popping, questions shouting, chaos erupting, and I stood in the center of it all, no longer invisible, no longer silent, no longer the scared girl at the bottom of the lake. I was Patricia Williams. I was Patricia Johnson. I was whole. The legal machinery moved swiftly once the evidence went public. Linda Smith was charged with insurance fraud, attempted murder, and filing a false police report. At 72 years old, she faced the consequences of crimes she thought she'd buried 40 years ago. Her bail was set astronomically high, $500,000, which she couldn't pay. She sat in Fulton County Jail awaiting trial, her health deteriorating rapidly behind bars. Within 2 weeks, all her assets were seized, pending the outcome of the criminal case and the civil suit I filed for damages. Her house, the one she'd nearly lost to foreclosure anyway, went up for auction to cover legal fees and restitution. I bought it, for cash, $30,000 below market value. The poetic justice of it made Betty laugh until she cried. "Girl, you're sleeping in that woman's bed now?" "No," I corrected. "I'm renting it to a lovely family from Ethiopia, refugees who needed a fresh start, at significantly below market rent." I smiled. "That house will finally know love instead of hate." Susan's consequences were different, but equally complete. The IRS prosecution moved forward. Years of tax fraud meant substantial fines and possible prison time. Her employer terminated her immediately following the gala, citing the reputational damage and the ongoing investigation into her expense account fraud. But the worst for Susan was Michael. The divorce papers were filed, uncontested. Michael sought and received full custody of their 2 children. My lawyers, the best money could buy, presented evidence of Susan's financial crimes, her family's history of violence, and most damningly, her own recorded words admitting knowledge of what happened at Lake Lanier. "You said she drowned," Susan had screamed at Linda. "You said she was dead." Those words, played in family court, sealed her fate. The judge awarded Michael primary custody, with Susan receiving supervised visitation only. The children would be protected from the poison that ran through their mother's family line. Susan's social circle evaporated overnight. Former friends deleted her from group chats, blocked her on social media, crossed the street to avoid her at the grocery store. Atlanta society is small and unforgiving when it comes to scandals of this magnitude. Attempted murder, insurance fraud, child abuse, these weren't the kind of crimes that could be explained away at brunch. The financial vindication was particularly sweet. The civil suit I filed sought the original $50,000 in insurance money, plus 40 years of interest, plus damages for pain and suffering, plus punitive damages. My lawyers calculated it at $2.3 million. Linda had nothing, but Susan had assets. The house she'd shared with Michael, retirement accounts, investment portfolios built partly on money she'd inherited from John Smith's estate. It all went to satisfy the judgment. And through it all, I never broke a single law. Everything was legal, documented, proper. I didn't have to become like them to destroy them. I just had to expose the truth and let justice do its work. The media coverage was relentless for weeks. "The ultimate comeback story," read the headline in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. "Woman rises from the dead to bring abusers to justice," proclaimed WSB-TV. My face was everywhere, not as a victim anymore, but as a survivor, an advocate, a symbol. True crime podcasts covered the case. Law schools used it as an example of long-delayed justice. Forensic Files requested an interview. I gave exactly 3 interviews, carefully selected, one to a Black journalist from The Root, one to a foster care advocacy magazine, and one to 60 Minutes. In each, I told the story in my own words, controlling the narrative that had once been used to erase me. Linda's trial date was set for 6 months out. Her public defender tried to negotiate a plea deal, but I refused through the prosecutors. This was going to trial. The world was going to hear, under oath and in a court of law, exactly what she'd done. Susan pleaded out on the tax charges. 3 years probation, massive fines, community service. She moved to a small apartment across town, worked retail, and lived with the shame of her mother's crimes and her own complicity. They were alive, but their lives, as they'd known them, were over. And I was just beginning to truly live. 3 months after the gala, I stood in the lobby of a newly renovated building in downtown Atlanta. The brass plaque beside the entrance read, "The Patricia Johnson Foundation for Foster Care Reform and Child Abuse Prevention." Michael stood beside me, my grandchildren holding our hands. Betty dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Karen and David smiled from the small crowd that had gathered for the ribbon cutting. "This foundation," I said to the assembled press and supporters, "exists because I survived what should have killed me, because I had to claw my way back from death and build a life from nothing. But not every foster child has that chance. Not every abused child escapes. This foundation will make sure they have advocates, resources, and most importantly, people who believe them." We cut the ribbon. The building opened. Inside were offices for social workers, lawyers who specialized in children's rights, therapists trained in trauma, and a resource center for current and former foster youth. I'd seeded it with $5 million of my own money, and donations were already pouring in from people who'd heard my story and wanted to help. The media called it redemption. I called it transformation. I'd gone from victim to victor to something more important, an advocate, someone who could use her voice, her resources, and her survival to protect others. Michael thrived in ways I hadn't expected. He'd been devastated by the divorce, by discovering that his wife's family had tried to kill his mother, but he channeled that pain into purpose. He volunteered at the foundation, sat on the board, used his medical expertise to develop trauma-informed care protocols for foster children. "You taught me something, Mom," he said one evening over dinner. "You taught me that justice isn't about revenge. It's about making sure the harm stops, the truth comes out, and the future is better than the past." My grandchildren were protected, thriving, safe. They knew an age-appropriate version of the story, that their grandmother had been hurt badly as a child, and that she'd worked very hard to make sure other children wouldn't be hurt the same way. They understood that family wasn't always about blood. It was about love, protection, and showing up. Linda went to trial in September. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later, 15 years for insurance fraud, 15 years for attempted murder, to be served consecutively. At 73, it was effectively a life sentence. She'd die in prison. The girl she'd tried to drown would outlive her in freedom. I attended the sentencing but didn't speak. My victim impact statement had been read into the record. But I didn't need to see Linda one last time. She was already dead to me, had been for 40 years. Instead, I went home to my beautiful house, made dinner with Michael and the kids, and sat on my porch watching the sunset over Atlanta's skyline. Betty came by with wine, and we toasted not to revenge, but to survival. "You did it," Betty said. "You really did it." "No," I corrected. "We did it. All of us. Everyone who believed me, who helped me, who refused to let the past stay buried." That night, I took out an old photo, one of the few I had of my biological parents. I placed it next to my wedding photo with Robert, next to pictures of Michael growing up, next to recent photos of my grandchildren. This was my family, built from love, not blood, forged in survival and strengthened by truth. I'd reclaimed every piece of myself they tried to take, my name, my dignity, my voice, my story. And in doing so, I'd become more than I'd ever imagined possible, not in spite of what they'd done to me, but because I'd refused to let it define me as a victim. I'd defined myself as a survivor, a mother, a grandmother, a businesswoman, and now an advocate. Justice through patience, family through protection, dignity through truth. These weren't just words anymore. They were the pillars of the life I'd built from the ashes of the one they'd tried to burn. If you're watching this and you've been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, I want you to remember something. Survival is the first revenge. Every day you wake up and choose to keep going, you're defying the people who tried to break you. Justice isn't always swift. Mine took 40 years, but it was absolute, it was legal, and it was earned through patience, preparation, and refusing to become the monster they tried to make me. I didn't win because I was cruel. I won because I was strategic. I didn't triumph through violence. I triumphed through truth. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who shows up, who protects you, who believes you when you speak your truth. Michael is my family. My grandchildren are my family. Betty, Karen, David, they're my family. Blood can betray you, love won't. So I'm asking you, which city are you from? Drop a comment and let me know. Share your story if you feel safe doing so. This community of survivors, we stand together. We protect each other. We refuse to stay silent. If you believe that justice delayed is not justice denied, hit that like button. if you agree that survivors deserve to thrive, not just survive. Subscribe to this channel. I'll be sharing more stories, more resources, more ways to fight back against abuse and betrayal. And remember, in the end, survival isn't just living. It's thriving despite the darkness. It's reclaiming every piece of yourself they tried to take. It's building something beautiful from the ruins they left behind. You're still here. You're still standing. And that means you've already won. Thank you for listening to my story. Now go out there and write your own ending. If you're still with me after this journey, then you understand something most people don't. Betrayal doesn't end when the abuse stops. It lives in your bones, in your dreams, in the way you flinch at certain sounds or smells. But here's what I've learned in my 40 years of surviving and thriving. Survival isn't just living. It's about thriving despite the darkness. It's about refusing to let the people who hurt you have the final word on who you become. When Linda pushed me off that boat, she thought she was erasing a problem. What she actually did was forge something unbreakable. Every night I slept in a homeless shelter, I got stronger. Every time I pulled myself up from nothing, I got wiser. Every tear I shed over Robert's grave or while holding my newborn son, I became more determined that my story wouldn't end with me at the bottom of a lake. Some of you watching this right now are in that lake. You're drowning in betrayal, in abuse, in injustice. You're wondering if anyone will ever believe you, if the people who hurt you will ever face consequences, if you'll ever feel safe again. I'm here to tell you, yes. Keep swimming. Keep breathing. Keep surviving. Because revenge isn't about becoming like them. It's about outlasting them. So tell me, which city are you from? Drop it in the comments. I want to know where my survivors are watching from. Are you in Atlanta like me? New York? Los Angeles? A small town where everyone knows your business? Share your story if you feel brave enough. You don't have to use real names. You don't have to give details that might hurt you. But let this community know you're here. Because we survivors, we stand together. We protect each other. We refuse to stay silent anymore. If you agree that betrayal deserves consequences, if you believe that abusers should face justice no matter how much time has passed, hit that like button. Show me you're out there. Show other survivors they're not alone. And please subscribe to this channel. I'm not done telling stories. The Patricia Johnson Foundation is collecting testimonies from survivors, and with permission, I'll be sharing them here. We're building something bigger than revenge. We're building a movement. A community of people who refuse to be defined by what was done to them. Look, I can't promise your justice will look like mine. I can't guarantee your abuser will go to jail or lose everything. Life isn't always that neat. But I can promise you this. Every day you survive is a victory they didn't give you permission to have. Every day you choose yourself over their narrative is an act of rebellion. Linda Smith wanted me dead and forgotten. Instead, I'm here. I'm thriving. And I've helped hundreds of foster children escape the hell she put me through. That's not revenge. That's resurrection. So here's my final truth for you, the one that kept me going through 40 years of waiting. In the end, the best revenge isn't destroying them. It's building something so beautiful, so meaningful, so powerful from the ashes they left behind that your very existence becomes proof of their failure. They couldn't break you. They couldn't erase you. They couldn't stop you. You're still here, and that means you've already won. Now go write your ending.